Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today, for what will hopefully be the last time in GTA 5 Online, I am ranking every drift tunable car. A couple of days ago we got drift tuning added to 4 old vehicles, and we got access to a new drift tuned vehicle. So I felt it was time to rank them all again. Leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new. Let's go. Starting off at number 20, we have the Declassy Drift Yosemite for $981,000 to $1,308,000, depending on if you have the trade price. The Drift Yosemite yet again remains as the worst of all the drift tunable vehicles in GTA Online. The biggest issue I have with it is due to the size of the vehicle. Unfortunately, not being able to squeeze between vehicles in the streets of Los Santos is a relatively large issue when it comes to drifting in free mode. Even still, in drift races where there's no traffic, you will face issues with this vehicle because of how big it is, and it's very unfortunate because this vehicle does have some pretty cool customizations and it does look cool, but it simply doesn't really have a chance versus the rest of the vehicles with drift tuning in GTA Online, at least in my opinion. Moving on to number 19, we have the Volcar Nebula Turbo for $797,000. Nebula Turbo, before drift tuning was added, has been one of the more drift-oriented vehicles in GTA Online over the course of the years. Sadly, I think it's pretty easily one of the worst drift tunable cars in GTA Online. Something with the steering simply just feels off to me. It seems like it oversteers way further than what you would want it to, and I think compared to the other cars with drift tuning, it just doesn't quite have the same flair, I'm afraid. It is relatively cheap at least, but it doesn't mean it's worth it. Next up, we have the Annis Euros for $1,350,000 to $1,800,000. And the Euros, as I said the last time I ranked the drift cars, and the time before that, the Euros has always disappointed me. I still feel that way with drift tuning applied or no drift tuning on the car either. Don't get me wrong though, this car is miles better than the Volcar Nebula Turbo that I just went over, but it's still nowhere near as good as the cars ahead of it on this list. I always wish this car is better than it was the last time that I drove it, and every time I'm disappointed, and I just feel like at this point it's kind of part of the Annis Euros' character. Moving on to number 17, we have the Declassy Drift Tampa for $995,000, and I remember the first time I ranked the drift tunable cars in GTA Online, a feeling of horrible disappointment with the Drift Tampa overcame me. As time has gone on, however, I think it has aged slightly better. The biggest problem is still the same as the first time and the last time that I ranked the drift cars, and the problem with the Drift Tampa is simply the size. This is a really big car, and for drifting in free mode, it's simply way too large to be able to dodge oncoming traffic or traffic that you're catching up to. You will find yourself hitting cars and other objects a lot with this vehicle because of the size. It's still very good on a closed course though, and I think it could be argued that it would place significantly higher, but I'm ranking these cars overall, so free mode is certainly a factor as well as racing, but I would say probably hold off on buying this car and get something ahead of it on the list if you want to start drifting. At number 16, unfortunately, we have the Bravado Gauntlet Hellfire for $745,000. This is one of the cars that got drift tuning added to it this week, and to be honest, I really hoped that this car would be awesome at drifting, as it was the vehicle I was most excited about when I heard that they were adding drift tuning to 4 additional vehicles. Sadly, the Hellfire feels a bit heavy and sluggish when drifting. I found the wheels harder to get spinning up as much as I wanted to. It's also a relatively large vehicle for being only a 2-door, and with the wide body kit on top, it doesn't really help. Now, I still think the Hellfire is an awesome car and it's insanely fun to drive around or put drift tuning on, but I think comparatively, it's one of the worst drift cars we've gotten since the initial ones came out. I still think it's awesome and it's relatively cheap as well, so I'd say to get it regardless, even if you end up removing the drift tuning at some point, because at the end of the day, it is still a wicked car. At number 15, we have yet another new car with the Vapid Dominator FX for $1,550,000. The Vapid Dominator FX narrowly edges out the Gauntlet Hellfire for a few small reasons. The biggest difference is the fact that the FX is a lot smaller than the Hellfire, which allows it to get into less collisions with objects or cars alike, and I feel like the weight is a big factor with the Dominator FX. This thing feels to me like it weighed even more than the Hellfire, but with this car, I felt like I was able to get the wheels to spin up significantly faster and easier than in the Hellfire, allowing me to feel like I had more control over what the vehicle was doing as I was drifting. I'm not saying it's significantly better than the Hellfire though, and for some you might actually find the Hellfire to be better depending on your personal preference, but overall I was a little bit disappointed with the Dominator FX. At number 14 we have the Anis Remus for $1,027,500 if you have the trade price, or $1,370,000 if you do not. The Remus is a fantastic looking car in GTA Online, and it's also a great car with the drift tuning applied to it. The biggest issue with this car though lies with the front end grip, or perhaps the lack of rear end grip, or a combination of both, honestly. I also think this car feels kind of long when drifting, and the back end will often hit things on the side of the road when you're coming out of a drift. It's an awesome car regardless, and I think you should have one. Just maybe put drift tuning on a different car if you really want to be drifting, particularly in free mode. At number 13 we have the Dinka-Jester RR for $1,477,500 to $1,970,000 if you don't have the trade price. The Dinka-Jester RR is one of the cars from the initial group of vehicles that first got the drift tuning ability added to them, and upon release of the drift tuning I ranked this car quite highly. Granted, there were about half of the current drift tunable cars in the game. Now I still think this thing is just as good as when I initially ranked it at number 4. However, we've had a lot of cars added into the game with the last several updates that have simply overshadowed the Jester RR. This thing does have a really good balance for drifting though, while also being small and having enough power to get the wheels spinning nicely. I still think this car is actually one of the best drift cars in the game, but unfortunately it just doesn't keep up with some of the newer cars in my eyes. At number 12 we have the Ubermacht Sentinel Classic Widebody for an initial cost of $650,000 plus a $700,000 Benny's upgrade. The Sentinel Classic Widebody has been in the game as a drift tunable car for a little more than a year now, and I still stand by what I said the time before last when I ranked the drift tunable cars, and that was that the Sentinel Classic Widebody is just a slightly mildly better version of the Jester RR. It has all the same great grip or handling as well as power, while just being slightly smaller and slightly lighter feeling, which helps a lot in my opinion. However, if you want a heavier feeling car, the Jester RR might be a better option for you. The Sentinel Classic Widebody definitely deserved to get drift tuning as an upgrade for it, so I'm glad it is available for this car, but depending on if you like a heavier car to drift or a lighter car to drift, you may want to rank these for yourselves a little bit separately. At number 11 we have the Anis Hardy for $1,380,000. At number 11 we have the Anis Hardy for $1,380,000. The Anis Hardy is a car that I thought would have had an absolutely massive and natural improvement with drift tuning added to it, because without drift tuning this car is generally very drift inclined, if you will, and feels awesome to slide through the hills of Los Santos. However, the drift tuning didn't really do much for me. This car almost feels like it understeers with the drift tuning, even when you're oversteering with full drift tuning applied. It also feels resistant to breaking the wheels loose a little bit. Oddly enough, I actually feel like it had an easier time kicking the rear end out before the drift tuning was applied, which seems quite counterintuitive. I think this car is awesome, but it certainly could have been dialed in to be a little bit more responsive. It's still a good car, you'll still enjoy drifting it, it's just not as good as some of the other cars ahead of it on this ranking. At 10 we have the Rune Chebrak for $145,000, and the Chebrak was one of a handful of vehicles added with the update before last to have drift tuning. This one was tough to rank last time I remember because it's actually very good, but it's also very slow and a little bit boring to drift to a certain point. The issue that I have with this car, which is also its biggest strength, is the fact that it is extremely slow. This means you won't get a lot of super high action drifting, and it won't exactly be too thrilling, but what you will get is an extremely easy car to drift with. The reason it's so easy is because A, it's a tiny car, but B, it's so slow that you have so much time to correct for any mistakes that you might make while you're drifting before you actually end up crashing into something. It's kind of hard to mess up, honestly. This paired with the fact that it's super cheap makes it a great entry-level drift car for newer players or people that just don't have a ton of money in GTA Online. The only reason it's in the middle of the list is because it takes absolutely no skill to drive, which you could argue that makes it a much better car. I said the same thing in the last ranking video, but I think on a list like this, if I put this car at number 1, I'm getting destroyed in the comment section. So I'll just leave it right here at number 10, dead in the middle of the pack. Next up, we have the Dinka-Jester Classic for $790,000. This is a vehicle that pleasantly surprised me when I first drove it. The Jester Classic actually makes a really good drift car, and I actually enjoyed drifting it around. The Jester Classic is a car I've historically been very critical of in online due to the engine resistance that this car is plagued with, which makes it way slower than it should have been in online. However, with the drift tuning applied, I didn't even think of it or notice the presence of engine resistance at all, not even one time. The Jester Classic is a lot of fun to drift, and it's relatively cheap to purchase. Additionally, it also has a lot of customization available to be applied to the car. It's certainly a great car to drift for the money, and being that it's based off the Toyota Supra, I feel like it's only right that it got the drift tuning added to it as an available upgrade. At number 8, we have the Fathom FR36 for $1,610,000. Years after the initial release of drift tuning and the FR36 itself, the FR36 remains one of the very best cars to use if you want to try to win ROCKSTAR's drift races. However, when it comes to drifting in free mode, I do feel like there are quite a number of cars that are superior to it, and mostly due to the size of the vehicle, although it is relatively small. It does drift really well, as good as any other car, or perhaps even better considering the drift race performance, but unfortunately it kind of lacks in customization. It kind of feels like 13 of basically the exact same bumper option, with one minor thing changed each time, and this goes for pretty much every customization category on the vehicle. I do think this car is pretty boring as well compared to a lot of the other drift tunable cars we have in the game now. So I'd say you definitely want one of these if you plan to do the drift races, but if you want something for racing and free mode, you might want to look a little bit higher up on the list. Moving on to number 7, we have the Ubermacht Cypher for $1,162,500 if you have the trade price, or $1,550,000 if you do not have the trade price. Now, there are 3 drift tunable vehicles that were added with the Bottom Dollar Bounties DLC last year, one of which was the Ubermacht Cypher, which is honestly the best of the 3, and it's not very close. It feels absolutely awesome to drive without drift tuning, so as you would hope, with drift tuning applied, it's also quite good. The Cypher has great customization due to it being released back in 2021 with the Tuners DLC, and funnily enough, the last time I released a drift tunable ranking video, the Cypher was on sale, and the week that I'm dropping this in 2025, it's also on sale. So consider picking it up while it's discounted if you're interested and you're watching this video kind of close to the initial release. Next up, we have the Annis ZR350 for $1,211,750 to $1,615,000 if you don't have the trade price. Now, with the release of the 5 newest drift tunable vehicles, the ZR350 has fallen a couple of spots from the last ranking video, but it is still one of the best drift cars in GTA Online, despite being one of the earliest to have it added as an upgrade that is available for it. It feels good to drift, and it isn't overly large, nor does it feel heavy when drifting. The customization options for this car are absolutely excellent as well, and I do think it is truly one of the best drift cars in the entire game. The only reason it's moved down a couple of spots are not because it's worsened over time, but just because some of the newest cars are incredibly responsive and feel awesome to drift with. Moving on to number 5, we have the Dinka Shavos V6 for $1,420,000, and I can't believe that I'm putting a Honda Accord this high up on a video about drift cars, but here we are. Out of all the new drift tunable cars, this was actually my favorite to drive. It felt incredibly consistent to drive, and I actually really enjoyed that. It's very precise while being fast enough, but also slow enough to be easily controllable. It really is a shame that this vehicle's stats come in a Honda Accord wrapped package, but I can't lie, I almost feel like the drift tuning makes it worth it to own this car in the first place. It really does feel a lot different than most other drift cars, and I think it could potentially be the best drift car in GTA Online as far as free mode drifting goes. But there's no way I'm putting an Accord at number 1, and I don't think it's going to be fast enough to actually win those drift races. Moving on to number 4 with the Karen Futo for $9,000. The Karen Futo basically feels the exact same as the Karen Futo GTX, which has had drift tuning as an available upgrade since it was added into the game initially. Now, the differences between the GTX and this is that this car costs over $1 million less, and if you count the non-trade price, it costs over $1.5 million less. It is still small and nimble, with essentially the same ability to lose grip and spin the wheels. It is just as fast feeling. The only thing that the Futo GTX does better than the regular Futo is purely revealed in the customization options available for the vehicle. Definitely value-wise is the best drift tunable car in GTA Online now, and there's literally no chance contesting that, unless you're watching this video in the first few days after it gets released. And the reason for that is that at number 3 we have the Declasse Walton L35, which is $0 this week. But if you're watching this the following week, this thing will cost you $1,403,000. And of course, we're talking about the Declasse Drift Walton L35. The biggest and best thing about this truck is the fact that it's free right now in GTA Online, but the second best thing is that it comes with drift tuning pre-installed on the vehicle, saving you a $200,000 upgrade cost and giving players who haven't wanted to fork out tons of money for a drift car a chance to try out drifting for no cost, this week at least. This little truck has some unique customization versus its slightly older Walton L35 stock, which we've had for a couple of months now. This truck is pretty tiny and it has a great feel when it comes to drifting. It's excellent on the street and in drift races. I think it will put up a pretty good fight against some of the previous champions like the Fathom FR36 in drift races. And if you're playing GTA Online in the next few days after this video releases, please make sure to get this vehicle for free from Southern San Andreas Super Autos before it goes to its regular price. At number 2, we have the Karen Futo GTX for $1,192,500 to $1,590,000 if you don't have the trade price. The GTX is a car I've given a lot of praise to since drift tuning was added for it, whereas before I absolutely despised this car. I feel like the main reason this car is so good with drift tuning is because of just how easy it is to drive. Now technically I've said a few cars are easy, like the Cheburek for example, and I've put them really low on the list, whereas this car is super high in comparison. And the reason for this is because it's a lot faster and a lot more customizable than the Cheburek, for example. I also think that the main reason for this car being so good is it being on the very, very small side. This helps a ton being able to avoid pedestrians, vehicles, and other objects that might get in the way of drifting in free mode or in races alike. The GTX has some great customization, and it's also quite notable due to its appearance in Initial D. I've never seen it, but people seem to love it largely because of that. But at number 1, we have the Benefactor Vorschlaghammer, sorry Germans, for $1,790,000. Now since the last time I ranked the drift tunable cars in GTA Online, my favorite and number 1 pick has not changed. The Vorschlaghammer is still such an awesome car to drift with, much to my surprise initially. This vehicle has a lot of great factors of some of the other larger cars, matched with the handling and feeling of some of the smaller cars we've gone over on today's list. It's not the most customizable car, but it really does a great job at drifting in free mode, and even in the races it's also quite good too. I think it's really cool that it's so good because against some of the cars on this list, it's not exactly one that you would expect to be so awesome, which to me makes it that much cooler. So there you have it guys, that is my ranking for every drift tunable car in GTA Online in 2025. Let me know what you thought of my ranking in the comment section down below. How wrong do you think I am? Do you have a different ranking that you would go with, or do you agree? Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, dislike if you didn't, consider subscribing to my channel if you guys are new, and with that being said, I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.